Hello, hi everyone. Thanks for joining in today. We are here on the June edition of Voices of Community with none other than Gleb Bamutov, Dr. Gleb Bamutov, I should say. And the topic, my favorite Cypress plugins, which is Gleb's favorite Cypress plugin. Gleb, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for inviting me. And hello, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure having you. And we'll give a couple of seconds so that people can join in from different parts of the world. And attendees, for those of you already joined, let's make the chat interactive. Please, let's start by putting in a message, sharing where you're from, and that should be good enough so that we know different the world. So Gleb would be very interested to know where you folks joining in from. Cool, keep them coming. Started off with India, which is known like any tool that you take, India will be the largest number of users. So there's no denying to that fact. So yeah, we have from Maryland, Montenegro. Great. Thanks. Keep them coming. And I'm sure Gleb will be getting enjoyed seeing all those. So while I'll see the chat going on, I'll shortly introduce about Gleb. Gleb Bamutov is a JavaScript ninja, image processing expert, and a software quality fanatic. And he's holding a senior director of engineering position at Mercari during the day job, helping with productivity and all different stuff. And whenever he gets the time, he try to hack into various different technology. I mean, Cypress including, and he has given a various talks about it. You can find it on his website, glebbamutov.com/talks. And while I was reading through the bio, I looked at Gleb has almost donned various different hats that any community person can have, which is he's a GitHub star, he's an Algolia ambassador, and he's a 𝐊𝐶 ambassador and a Microsoft MVP too, and an ex-Cypress distinguished ambassador and distinguished engineer as well. So I think Gleb, the Google Dev expert, is the only one missing. So hopefully we wish you will get that soon, adding more feathers to your cap. With that, I'll hand over the stage to you. Please take over.
Thank you, Manoj, and thank you for inviting me. And I just want to say that I was applying for Google Dev a couple of years ago, and funny enough, 2 years passed, and they just sent me email that my application has been rejected 2 years later. Some kind of system, right? Went through like all the emails, okay, and just rejected now. Like I know that I didn't want to continue it, but yeah, it's funny that you mentioned it.
Okay, I understand the story.
I just want to say that yes, I do love Cypress, but I love all the testing tools. Whatever is your favorite tool of choice. I mean, I had experience with lots of them. I was looking for something that I could use and test my websites. And I did write a lot of plugins for Cypress. I used to work at Cypress. Right now, I work at Mercari US. And I even gave a version of this presentation a long time ago, probably 2 years ago, but I updated for today. So you'll find a lot of new content. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world watching this. The slides for this presentation are already public. We're going to share them later. And this QR code leads to the presentation as well. So if you have your phone, you can just quickly go there. Okay, so the whole presentation is about 40 minutes, and then put your questions in the Q&A widget on Zoom, and we're going to get to them, and I'll answer all of them to the best of my ability after the presentation. Before I begin, I'm going to mention really quickly that our planet is in danger. India is suffering through a heat wave, Texas, there is heat waves and droughts all around the world. And if we don't change the course, it's going to be really, really bad. And, we can act. I'm an optimist. I think I can change my life, but we can change the course of history by joining together. So find an organization in any city where you live and do little things and big things together. Only by working together, we can save our planet. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So I had a long-ish career. I programmed everything from C and C++ and Objective-C through Java, all the way to JavaScript. And right now I do most of my work in Node.js and web. And you can find pretty much everything I've done on my site, 𝐵Lab.dev, on my GitHub account, on my blog. And I even started recording over the last couple of years YouTube videos that show mostly Cypress, but sometimes other things, because sometimes a blog post works the best, but sometimes a video, speaks volumes as well. So I try to record it. I'm a senior director of engineering responsible for web testing at Mercari US. Mercari US is online marketplace. Anything that you no longer use, you can sell with ease by taking a picture, making listings. Because I'm responsible for testing at a large company, I'm actually done a bunch of presentations already about testing. So you can find at least 6 presentations, I believe, on my slides.com account. If you're interested how to run lots of tests, how to make sure QA department gets respect, these presentations are for you. And last year, I started doing courses. So I have a couple courses on my website, cypress.tips. You can see one of the courses is about Cypress plugins, exactly the topic of this talk. So in this presentation, I will start by saying don't use plugins. Okay, this is the start of my presentation. The most important thing is why you don't want to use plugins in Cypress, but it's. And then I'll actually talk about plugins, how they work, and some of my favorite plugins in this list. Okay, so I had experience with lots of testing tools, but the thing that really sold me on Cypress is how simple and complete it is. If you ever use JavaScript, you know that to install a dependency, we use npm. So to install Cypress, all you have to do, install Cypress. That's it. It downloads everything that it needs. It downloads a binary build for each platform. It's open source. You can clone it, fork it. You find all the source code online. And then you write a test, right? After you do a single npm install, you write a test. It uses Mocha, behavior-driven syntax. So you kind of say site-visit, site-get elements using a CSS selector or jQuery selector, and you say it should be visible. So there are chai assertions already included. And when you run Cypress, it looks like this, like the screenshot. This is the browser. You can see the website that you're testing, in this case, localhost 3000, in an iframe on the right side of a browser window. And then you see every command like site-visit, site-get, and assertions in a command log column on the left. So really, really, in-your-face kind of visual, easy to understand test runner. You can create a more useful test, in this case, to do that adds to to-dos by visiting the site, finding the input box with class new to-do, typing, learn testing, then typing be cool, followed by enter key, and then you get all li elements, and you confirm there are 2 because you enter 2 items. And this is how it looks when you open Cypress again. The website is on the right, and you can see it actually operate. So every command like visit, get, type, you can see it actually being performed live in front of you. So you understand how the application behaves. You understand what the app is doing. So that's great, but this kind of simplistic example, you have to go beyond that, right? Because if you want to see a useful, realistic test, you sometimes need, more than just typing, clicking buttons, and checking the page. So some of the cool things in Cypress is that straight out of the box, it includes very powerful features. For example, here we will test that the application is requesting different fruits from the backend. And Cypress has built-in things to deal with this, because in this case, application is requesting and showing a different fruit every 30 seconds. So normally we don't want to wait 30 seconds and wait another 30 seconds because the test is long. So Cypress has a built-in clock control mechanism. You can freeze the clock before you visit the site and say, just stop. Okay? And then you can also define network mocking or spying or stubbing. And in this case, I will stub it different ways. So first time, when the network call to favorite fruits endpoint happens, we're going to respond with apples. Second time it happens, we're going to reply with grapes. And then after that, we're going to reply with kiwi. So we define network stubs. And when we visit the site, and the application will make a call and we'll just say, the page should show apples, from our first stub. And then we're going to control the clock again and say, okay, instead of waiting for real 30 seconds, we can say tick 30 seconds, and the application will think the 30 seconds passed, but it's instant. And then the application makes another request and should show grapes from our second network intercept. And then we can wait a couple more half-minute intervals, again instantly, and application should show kiwi. And this is how it looks when it runs. Notice it's instant, it's like 260 milliseconds, not minutes. And what I'm doing also here, I'm hovering over commands in the command log, and you can see the application iframe changes. Cypress keeps track of all the page changes and DOM mutations, and it actually reconstructs the DOM snapshot at that particular command. So you can see how application looked when the test executed. You can see how it behaved and how it responded to the actions of a test. And this is all built in. And this is why people are actually impressed with Cypress, right? They do a single install and boom, they have a great developer experience. So Cypress is a complete testing solution in a single dependency. It includes the test runner using Mocha engine. It has a browser already, but it can use a browser installed on your machine. You can access all your operating system from Node.js code in the config file. It includes chai assertions. It includes spying and stubbing methods using Xenon library. It has clock control like I showed. It has network marking like I showed. It also includes a bunch of utilities that you can use for dealing with data and timestamps and promises and so on. So a lot of people ask, the first thing they, kind of look at Cypress and they're like, how do I create a testing framework using Cypress, right? And it's a complete wrong question. It's like, you don't have to do anything. Like by default, Cypress has everything you need to start writing tests. It has all the bells and whistles. So my advice to you, like, don't start coding with Cypress, like the first, minute, like it's fine to kind of check it out, right? But I would suggest that in the long run, you're going to save yourself days, if not weeks, of kind of recreating what it already has by reading the guides and documentation, by studying it. I think this icon kind of, shows the studying, and then maybe learning through hands-on courses, okay? And then you'll save yourself a lot of time. So you don't have to install any plugins. You don't have to write anything on top of Cypress. It's a complete framework already ready to go. And yet, having said all that, this is how I start all my projects if I use Cypress. I install not just Cypress, right, as a dependency, but I install Prettier because I want my code to be auto-formatted. I don't want to worry about that. And I also install this plugin called Cypress Map. Why do I do that? The reason is that the current version of Cypress is version 12.15. So version 12 came out, I think, at the beginning of this year, or maybe, okay, it says December 12th, so at the end of last year. And it's a big, big deal because it introduced retriable chains of commands. For the whole history of Cypress for the last 6 years, it didn't have it. And let me explain how this actually matters to me and to everyone. So imagine I'm asking you, can you test this page? And notice here that the items appear one by one with like some random delays. Like, I don't know what the delays, I have no control over application, but it shows apples, pears, and then kiwi. So you want to write a test as a human being, and your test will be kiwi is the last item, okay? So this is what a human would ask, right? A test case written by humans for other humans. You have to translate this to actual kind of, machine pseudocode. It's not real code, but how would a machine actually confirm it? Well, you get the elements, probably with some selector. You take the last element, and you check its text. It should be kiwi. Okay, so you probably would write it one-to-one in Cypress code. You visit the page, site visit, you get items, site get, and then selector. So this will give you all the elements with that selector, li elements. You get the last element, there is site last command that takes the previous elements and just returns the last element. And then you add a chai assertion, should have text kiwi. Sounds very natural. This is what I would write. This is what you would write. This is every beginner's code. Unfortunately, even Cypress version 11, the one right before the current, if you write this test in this particular situation, would show you an error. Notice what happens. It's getting the items. It has the last item, but yet it doesn't see the new items. It keeps saying, expected to find text kiwi, and the text was apples. Like, why doesn't it see pears and kiwi? Okay, so there's this disconnect. And the problem was in Cypress all the way until right now is that if assertion should have text kiwi failed, it would go and retry immediate previous command. Now, Cypress already grabbed the items, and it was just apples, and it kept retrying, getting from apples kiwi, kiwi. It did not see the new items because it already grabbed them, and it did not retry site get. It only retried site last. And this was a huge, huge area of confusion. Everyone was unhappy. I was unhappy. I mean, there are ways around it, obviously. But Cypress version 12 decided, okay, enough of this. All these commands are safe to retry because they're just querying. They don't change the application. They just, look at that again. So Cypress version 12 will go back to the original start of this kind of command chain. It will get elements, get the last one, and check its text again and again. And this is why it passes, because it actually goes back and requires the very start of this command chain and finds the updated list of items. And you can have multiple commands. For example, here, I'm getting the items, I'm getting the last, I'm invoking the text method because Cypress passes things like jQuery object. And when I check that that text is equal to a kiwi. So from an element, I'm going to text, and then I'm confirming. So it goes and retries again from the start of a query chain. I can even let's say if I have numbers instead of text, I can add sci-then command and call a function with a current text and convert a number before I'm comparing it, and this fails. And this fails because Cypress only retries commands that it knows are safe to retry, like sci-get, sci-last, sci-invoke even. But sci-then command that runs an arbitrary function on the current data is not retried. There is no equivalent built-in command, and this is so dumb, right? You create this wonderful feature for transforming the data and retrying things, and boom, there is no way to actually kind of use it, right? With realistic examples, right? And this is why I wrote Cypress map. To use this plugin, you just import it, and it adds all these extra commands. And look at this code, right? I'm using sci-get just like before, sci-last, I'm invoking text, and then I'm calling apply. So apply comes from Cypress map, and it's retriable. It's marked as a query command. And so if you look at this code, notice that the number in assertion changes. It shows 10, 20, and then 30, and then it passes. So I use Cypress map because I need all these query commands that could be retried and make Cypress version 12 work. And we can go beyond just a single item. We can say, get me all li elements, map each element to its property inner text, which is HTML property. Okay, so we have a jQuery object with a bunch of items. We map each one to its property, then we convert each text in that array to a number, and now we use deep equal assertion to make sure we get 10, 20, 30. And this is how it works. just like written, just like a human would kind of confirm this test. It goes back if it's different numbers and retries again and again. So it's not just map. Cypress Map, the plugin, has a bunch of utility methods like printing and mapping and reducing data. It even includes things like, here's a table, get this whole table, all the values from all the cells in a single shot, and then I want to confirm. And you can even say, don't give me the whole table, just give me a section or a region of a table from like this coordinates to this coordinates, and I can confirm it in a single, easy to use operator. And again, this is not part of built-in Cypress API. This is something that I needed to take advantage of version 12 capabilities that I thought would be extra commands that Cypress doesn't include by default. So if nothing else, just remember, if you use Cypress, you probably will benefit from Cypress Map plugin if you use Cypress version 12 or later. So having shown one plugin that I use in pretty much every project, I want to explain how plugins work. So Cypress is really a Node.js process. That Node.js process also opens a browser that it can control, and then the tests run inside that browser. Now, the cool thing is that because it's JavaScript in the Node.js process and JavaScript in the browser, the plugins can modify the behavior of a Node.js process. For example, how to bundle specs, how to find specs. And plugins can also modify what the browser does because they can change even Cypress' own code. So if you think of Node.js process and the browser being Cypress, some of the plugins that I've shown today, like Cypress Map, I've shown that already, they just run in the browser, right? And they modify just what commands you have and how they execute. Other plugins, like Cypress ES-Build preprocessor, where you can switch and even speed up your testing by switching from built-in Webpack preprocessor that bundles a test file and all the code inside of it, you can switch to Cypress ES-Build preprocessor and make it faster. And some plugins, even the ones I showed today, like Cypress Grep, they actually have to work in both cases. So they have a Node.js part and the browser part, because, for example, if you're grepping, right, you sometimes have to pre-filter the spec files to only find spec files that include, title or a tag. Okay, so how many plugins are there? So Cypress has a page with all the plugins. Notice it's a lot, right? There are some built-in plugins that Cypress official team maintains. There are community plugins that people write, and these are listed on the page. And you can kind of see that official, right, is the one from Cypress team. Community, it's anyone can submit a plugin, right? Verified means, yes, someone else from outside the team has written the plugin, but the Cypress team reviewed it. Experimental is an interesting one. It's the one that, would be a cool feature for Cypress, the core test runner, to include, but it's unclear if it should. It's unclear what the best API would be. So a great example of this were the component testing plugins that I've written. So I've written it to experiment. There were experimental plugins. You just install them separately. But after a while, it became clear that this is a good feature. So they were migrated and became part of the core. One of the coolest plugins that everyone probably should use, and it's most popular, most downloaded, is Cypress Real Events. So one of the things in Cypress is because it runs in the browser, it uses JavaScript synthetic events like typing, clicking, which sometimes are limited. For example, in Cypress, there is no hover because there is no way to simulate hover in a browser through just JavaScript. Cypress Real Events uses Chrome Debugger protocol to send those commands. So you can do hover. So in this case, I'm hovering in my test over that crescent moon. So you can see how it changes and CSS styling applies. Really popular plugin that can do a lot of things like that. In general, I would say this is JavaScript. In JavaScript, anything that's not bolted down means like frozen, sealed, you cannot change properties of an object or cannot add a property, you can change that. So you can add new things and you can override existing behavior. So let me give you an example of plugins that do both. So first, adding new things. So imagine you have a test and it checks each element by selector. You're getting header should be visible, main should be visible, footer should be visible. And at some point you're like, well, it's the same test, you just vary the selector. So you put selectors in an array and then you iterate using for each and you get that selector and you run the same assertion. So you kind of say, it would be nice to separate those things into the tests, separate tests, so that if one fails, I can still run the rest and get accurate results. So this is where you can say, okay, let me add a new method to the it function, it.each, and then you can take array of items and the title of a test and a callback, and you can create those tests separately. So you can do that, and then you would have something like this, where you can say selectors and it.each, selectors, and then the callback would be normal commands, and you'd get the current selector. And this is what became Cypress each plugin. It allows you to create tests dynamically from the data. This is how it looks. Just like before, only the selectors of the data is the first argument, and then it returns another function. And it creates separate tests, right? And you can format the test title yourself. It automatically substitutes the data there, right there. And then you can even pass multiple arguments. So you can create data-driven tests from an array of arrays, and you get each item separately, so you can write complicated things. And then you start adding utility things like, can you run or generate n tests from the same thing? Maybe you want to run them in a row just to confirm that it's not flaky. You can say, I have a giant array, but I'm going to test each third item. Or you can say, I have a big array and I'm going to divide it in 3 different specs. And the first one will just take the first third of items. You can even say, okay, I have a big array and I'll just take a random item from that array, or random 2 items in this case, and create 2 tests. So it varies. I start small. I start usually with prototyping something that I think would be kind of useful. And then I keep extending it if people open issues or I myself see a need to add more functionality. So Cypress each kind of grew over time. Now, another thing where you can add new things, not just to functionality, but to Cypress UI, is my Cypress Watch and Reload plugin. So typically, Cypress watches your spec file, and if you type it and save it in your editor, Cypress reruns those tests automatically. And it's all good, right? But sometimes you want to watch the source of your application if it's running locally, and you might want to say, if I change my application, index, HTML, or JavaScript, I want to rerun the tests right away. So this is what Cypress Watch and Reload does. And it even creates a little button right there in the Cypress command log, so you can actually disable that. Maybe you want to change a bunch of files. You don't want to run the test just yet, but I create a little button. And I think that a way for plugins to have a visual representation inside Cypress UI would be cool. Unfortunately, Cypress team decided to go otherwise. So I think very unfortunate decision for them as a company. They decided not to provide an API for plugins to actually have a UI in a command log. But it's their choice. It's their open source project. Okay, so that was adding new things. What about overriding existing things? So one of the things that many people complain in Cypress and asking was, can we grab and run just a test by part of its title or test tags, right? Like, how could you do that? Well, it's just JavaScript. You can take the global it function provided by Cypress, because it includes Mocha, and then you can override it. And you can say, I'm going to look at the current title, and I'm going to look at the grep settings, right, from Cypress environment that the user passed. And if the title includes that grep string, then I'm going to run it. Otherwise, I'm just going to skip the current test. And so you can use it by passing the config value from command line or using environment variables. And this is how you'd run a subset of your tests, right? Just like that. It's very simple. And this became Cypress grep, or later I have my own version that I'm extending called cygrep. It overrides the global it function. And now you can do lots of things. You can say, run all the functions that include the text loads. It also understands tags. Run all the tests that are tagged smoke. Or you can invert it and say, run all the tests that don't have a tag smoke. Or maybe you want to run all the tests that includes two of these tags, smoke and fast. Okay. You can also run all the tests 5 times that include text loads, so burning them, as I call it. You can also pre-filter things, right? This is why this plugin can be included in the config file that runs before the browser opens. You can even run all the tests that have nothing tagged, right here, grep untagged. And you can even run selected tests by title or test tags from the DevTools console in your browser. So dynamically, you can just say, okay, I want to run just this test. So you don't have to modify the spec source code. Excellent. So this was an example of a couple plugins. And now I want to go into the last two, because I think this is something advanced, but a lot of people are asking how to do things like Cypress recurse and data session allow. So imagine I'm asking you, here's a big table, it's paginated, and I want to click next page button until we reach the last page and the button is no longer there. So this is what a human would ask. You have to translate it to some kind of robots pseudocode. And robots would be something very, simple. You would say, get me the next button, and if it's disabled, well, you are on the last page. But if it's not disabled, then click on that and then repeat. And this is how you go step by step, click by click, all the way to the last page. And this is what my plugin Cypress Recurse allows you to do. The most important things are the first function that executes the step number 1, get me the next button. So this returns you a jQuery object. And then you have a predicate. This is step number 2. You're now looking at that button and you say, does it have attribute disabled? Because if it does, then you know to stop. You're done. You're on the last page. If it doesn't have disabled, then you wait 500 milliseconds just for maybe making sure that in the test you can see it. And then you execute the post callback where you actually click on that next button because you know it's not disabled yet. And this is how it looks. You load the page and then it keeps clicking. And then when the button is disabled, it just logs last page. And now you can move on to the next part of the test. This abstracts a lot of things that manually would probably be a little bit complicated to write. You can solve now problems like, can I reload the page until the data shows up, right? If I don't know how long it would take. Maybe can I scroll the page until I see the data I'm looking for, right? Can I maybe type into the box, and if it's a little bit flaky, maybe if it doesn't have a full text, maybe it lost a couple of characters, I can clear it again and type it again. So any kind of operation in Cypress test that like do operation X until precondition or like predicate Y is true, do that. So that's Cypress recurse. And before I move to the next plugin, the very last one, Cypress data session reminder, ask all the questions. I see a bunch of questions already. I'm going to answer them when I finish with a presentation. But if you have any kind of questions, put them there. So the last plugin that I use a lot, especially at work, it's called Cypress data session. And this problem is not specific to Cypress, but it's a very common problem in end-to-end testing. And that's how do you create data or load data? Okay, so imagine in order for me to do anything in my test, I have to do 2 things right away. I have to create a user and then log in, right? Create data. So I could write something like this, where, I have username and password that I want to use. I will call a little utility function that will go to the page, type input username, type password, click maybe submit button. And then once I have that user created, then I can log in. Again, go to the login page, enter username, password, click login. And then I should see some user page. Okay, so this is how it looks. I'm registering a user, and then I'm logging in, and I'm on that rooms page. Now, it's all good and it works, but it takes 4.5 seconds. And imagine if I have multiple tests and each test has to create the user. Now, that takes a while. So the question is, right, why do I have to recreate the same things if I run the test again, or if I maybe have similar tests, right? And also you have a problem of cleaning up, right? I cannot create the user with exactly the same username and password, right? The username becomes a problem. So the data creation problem is really creation of the data and figuring out if you already have it, and caching so you can reuse the data. And this is exactly what Cypress Data Session plugin solves for you. So if before I called register user, logging user, now I put register user inside a side data session command that this plugin adds. So the setup to create the data is register user, and I'm giving it a name for this data session, and this my setup, just like before, goes to the page, creates a thing. Now, the cool thing about this is that next time the test runs, okay, so after the first one, okay, let's see. Here it is running the second time. I already have that user, and it has it in memory, so it doesn't have to even go and sign up. And this is why the time was cut from 4.5 seconds to 2.5. And internally, the data session in memory keeps all this information, like what was the user, the timestamp, all the jazz. Okay. And from DevTools console, I can even interact and say, like, delete this data session, list it, right? All this. Okay. Now, the very common thing, what if that user is already there? Well, I can actually run Cypress task to look into my database and say, do I have that user already? Because if I do, I want to use it. I don't want to set it up. So if init returns something from the database, then the setup is skipped. And this is what I will see. I found the user. Okay, it's already there. I don't have to recreate it again. So next time you run it, it just says, yeah, it's there. So Cypress data session has this whole flow of how it can determine if the data is there, if it needs to be created, if it's already valid. So it doesn't have to be created right in memory, but it can probably be set in the browser. So what about the second part? So imagine the user is created. Well, what about logging into the browser? And like usually it sets a cookie or whatever. So you can create a separate data session just for user being logged in and that cookie being there. So the setup would be to run the normal login and then getting the cookie, which shows the user's session ID. By default, wherever the setup returns or yields, that's what's going to be stored in memory. And this is kind of like, yes, I have it. And then there is a special callback saying, okay, if you have it in memory, the browser session is fresh. It's completely clear, so each test is isolated. Just grab that cookie value and set it in a browser and go to the page that requires user to be logged in, because you already set the cookie, the session cookie, that authenticates the user. So you're going to be logged in instantly. And you can even say, okay, this session being logged in only is valid if the user session is valid. So if you don't have a user, you don't try to log in. If a user has to be recreated for whatever reason, right? For example, if it was deleted, right, from the database, you will recreate the logged in data session as well. So there are all these dependencies. But the ultimate result is this. So this is the first time it runs. It has to create everything, 4.5 seconds. Second time you run it, everything is already set and you logged in. instantly. So we went from 4.5 seconds to 240 milliseconds in this case by just using two little lines or two commands of code and saying, this is how you want to store the data that you create, and this is how you want to set it back in the browser. We use this plugin a lot at work because we don't want to recreate, users, listings, sold items, messages, right? We want to create them once and then reuse them for as long as possible. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation. I want you to remember that Cypress is extendable. It's just JavaScript. Anything you can change or add using JavaScript, and it's very flexible language. You can do it, right? You can do it in Cypress. I've shown a bunch of plugins, Cypress Map, Real Events, each, grep, recurse, data session, but there are lots and lots and more. And a good way to find the plugins that I find useful is to subscribe to my free newsletter. I send a list of resources and articles and videos every month about Cypress. And a couple of years ago, I had an advent calendar where one of our articles was my favorite Cypress plugins, right? The same title as this presentation. But unfortunately, there were so many plugins, I had to write a follow-up a couple of days later where I listed more of my plugins that I love. And now I made a course with lots of hands-on lessons, but where I cover, I think, 22 plugins. And I think almost all but like 2 are made by me. So the title of this presentation, My Favorite Cypress Plugins, is kind of has double meaning. It's the Cypress plugins that I love, but also it's the Cypress plugins that I wrote. So check out the course. There are some free lessons as well. So I want to thank everyone for listening to my presentation. This is the URL and the QR code to go to the presentation. I will answer all the questions that I can in the amount that we have. Again, ask me anything. You can also send me email or tweet at me later if you want something answered, not during the presentation, but as a follow-up. Okay, Manoj, should we answer questions? Or should we just skip it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I'm actually blown away by the number of questions. I think by far, this is the highest webinar where I've seen a lot of questions in the Voice of Community series. So I'm sure people know to utilize, the right time when the right person comes on board, online to answer questions. Before we jump into the questions, I think the first 2 slides was excellent. Could you please bring that back, Gleb, so that we can take a quick screenshot?
This one or the last one?
The next one on the planet. Yeah.
Ooh, it's.
I think it's a nice way to start.
Good. Yeah.
And also the next one was good.
The situation is grim. I have to agree, but acting together at all levels, right? So I'm a member of organization right here in Cambridge, and then a member of state organization, but also the one on United States federal level. Like I'm trying to do something for each level where maybe something would work, right?
Absolutely. I mean, thank you so much for putting that message out. Again, I think first of its kind in Voice of Community. So happy to have someone talked about it. And it's much needed. And
yeah, thank you, Manoj.
Cool. I think let's jump into questions. There's a lot of them, as I mentioned. We could stop sharing the screen and get on the screen.
Yep.
To talk. Let me pick up some questions for you.
Okay,
cool.
Stop sharing.
So the first question is from Prasad. Which plugin should I use to integrate Microsoft SQL Server with Cypress? I've tried a few, but it's not working. So any recommendations from your side?
Okay, so I did look at that because everyone's asking the same question, right? And I do plan to add it to my course. I did not find anything that works straight out of a box, but you have to remember, any code that runs in the Cypress config file, in the setup callback, it runs in Node. So you would connect to Microsoft SQL or MySQL or Postgres from Node, right? You can write the same code in Cypress in your config file, it connect the same way. So the closest I have is like examples with like MongoDB, right? But if you know how to connect to your Microsoft SQL, you can write that code and put it or require it from Cypress config file and connect it that way. Okay, but I will make a lesson. Unfortunately, probably not free, but yes, it's nothing out of the box works, I think, very well, unfortunately.
Absolutely. As the saying goes, good things doesn't come free. So don't worry, I'm sure people will find it useful, Gleb. Let's jump into the next question from Liraj Maharajan. It's kind of a lengthy one with an example, but
Yeah.
I hope you can take a look. Is there error handling method for an element that was not found? And there is an example.
Yes. Let me just mention really quickly. So if you don't know if elements should be there or not, I think this is a bad pattern, right? And I'm sorry to say that, right? But your test should know what to expect. It should not have a logic. If I see this, then I'll do that. That's an example of what's called conditional testing, okay? Where you kind of do different things depending on what you see in application. The problem with that is that if you do that, then sometimes you might take one path locally all the time, but you run it on CI and the data is different, so you see something else and you take else branch all the time. And so you have, first of all, confidence in the wrong thing, and second, you might not test every situation because, well, you always take one path. And it might be hard to debug because locally you see if else path, on CI you see else path. So you try to minimize as much as possible and always know, should the element be there or not, which is fine. But let me share my screen really quickly just for one thing. And sure. Okay, I'm gonna share it. And then I'm gonna go to this site, Cypress Tips Search. Okay, and we probably will even put it in. Actually, I cannot share it right with everyone, but this is my site, and here you can find everything that I've written about Cypress or recorded. So inside examples, you can say conditional testing. Okay, and if you look at the left side, right, you can see element does not exist or is invisible. So here I'm showing how to do things where the button, for example, might not be present. Okay, short thing, kind of answer. You can disable the built-in existence assertion by providing like a dummy assertion, and that kind of tells Cypress don't use the built-in existence assertion because element might not be there. And then you yourself can do different things depending on the element being there or not. So Cypress.tips/search, it's like having me next to you and you asking question, right? Like the best I can do. Right?
Amazing. I think that's a wonderful resource. Thanks for sharing that, Gleb. Next question. I hope that answered your question, Liraj. I think that is pretty detailed, and do check out the website that Gleb shared. And I'm sure you also have another question from Liraj, something on break the Cypress times, and I believe the same could be found on the same website. Search.
Yeah, but one thing I want to say that because I forget myself, right? I try to put all the links and resources into the README of a plugin. So if you have a specific plugin question, right, for me, just look at the README. Sometimes there is like links to videos and blog posts, right? And if it's not there, no big deal. Open an issue and I'll try to answer and link it right there from README.
Cool. Real quick, let's try to answer this. Is there a way to break Cypress times in middle of an execution?
So like stop probably. So the Cypress time, okay, let me explain. So Cypress includes Lodash utility library. It's like a Swiss Army knife of little functions to do things like, give me a sample out of this array. So Cypress_times is this utility method that says run this callback function like n times, like 10 times. So Unfortunately, there is no built-in thing to break load dash times, as far as I know, right? It's not some Cypress utility, but you can say, because you get the iterator value 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, you can say, you know, if k is above 5, for example, return. So early return. You can also use a local variable outside and say, you know, stop. And by default, it's false. But if you want to break something, you can say in this callback, like stop equals true. And then at the start of callback, you can say if stop, return, early return. So it's a little bit of your own logic. Unfortunately, it doesn't depend on Cypress. It's pure, you know, third-party kind of utility.
Cool. Thank you, Gleb. And next question is up from Kate. What plugin do you recommend for visual testing?
It's a great question. I'm the one who's written the Cypress visual testing guide. So if you go to Cypress documentation, you search for visual testing, there's a whole guide where, you know, there are plugins for major platform, right? So LambdaTest bought Percy. I love Percy. Great visual testing plugin. Okay.
No, it's not S, just a correction.
Oh, browser stack. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Right? Like, I apologize. Someone bought them, right? It's even one of our. Okay. Yeah. So Percy, Applitools has a great plugin. There's Hapo and some very open source ones, right? The main difference is not even functionality. The main difference is like, do you want to maintain it? Because you have to store images and update them, right? So a lot of people go with open source by default because it's free. And then they're like, okay, well, I have now invest my own time in just maintaining and doing things, right? So I would say try one of a commercial offering where you don't have to store anything. It's just part of your workflow. You can like visually review things and say accept. So Percy, Applitools, anything else. There are a couple new ones. Okay, so nothing best. Evaluate each one.
We'll try to do a small pitch at LambdaTest. We have our own visual testing. We didn't acquire anyone, but we're building our own. Maybe you can check it out on our website as well. Thanks for that question. And any plugin to handle window pop-ups in Cypress?
Okay. So if you go to Cypress search, cypress.tip/search, I have a blog post that talks about like the pop-ups, and the pop-ups are not like confirm or alert, but I understand that as like opening a second window, browser window, right? Which could happen when you click on a link with a target equals, you know, blank, for example, or your JavaScript in application code calling window.open. So I have a blog post that kind of summarizes what to do in each case. Again, Cypress has access to your, you know, JavaScript window.open method. It can stub it, replace what's called. You have access to the link and its attributes, so you can change target blank to target self. So instead of opening a second window and trying to, you can continue working in the same window and keep testing it, right? It's not perfect, but I found it to work in majority of cases.
Thank you. And let's slightly change tracks and get into the mobile side of the world. Question from Florencia. Any possibility to integrate mobile testing with Cypress?
Well, yes and no. So no, you cannot start Cypress on a real mobile device, right? Unfortunately. At Mercari, and you can find, again, from cypress.tip/search, you can find my blog post how we do mobile testing using Cypress. So in our case, mobile means it's a desktop, right? But in mobile resolution and with mobile user agent string, because we actually send different pages depending on the user agent with different components, right? Different layouts, and there is also responsive design. So we test our mobile by having specific tests that do different user agent and do different resolution, like the viewport in Cypress. And then it works just like if you open. It's not foolproof, right? Obviously, it's not full mobile device, but I think it's easy to do, and it covers probably a lot of problems that you want to investigate, because majority of mobile issues are really like layout is broken, right? Or something, or your component is requesting the data that's no longer there, right? Because it's a different component from what you see on a desktop that the developers use. So it's more like, you have to do sanity testing, right? And I think Cypress is enough of that.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question is again from Prasad. It's a very specific use case based question, Gleb. The question is, how can we use Cypress data session plugin in case of automating a Microsoft application like CRM using Cypress?
So
as
in
it
all
seems
those
to have a
cases,
dependency on Cypress.origin, as I see.
okay, in all these cases, right? So the origin means that you testing, let's say, localhost 3000, but then you have usually like login. And the login leads you to like live.microsoft.com, where you have to enter Microsoft thing and you get redirected back. So like kind of like SSO, right? So the origin is a different question, right? If you can do the test, right, and log in Cypress and you use origin to like do your live.microsoft, and then you go back to look, if you can do that, you can use site data session, right? Because at the end of the day, live.microsoft.com will set a cookie or set a token, maybe in local storage or IndexedDB, that authenticates the user. Okay, if you can do login and get that cookie or token, then site data session can just store it for you and then set it back in a browser, and then you'll be logged in instantly. So as long as site origin works, site data session works for you.
That's wonderful. Something new that I learned. Thanks for sharing that, Gleb. Next up, I think before that, Florencia says, thank you very much for answering on the visual testing.
Appreciate it.
Next question is from Kamal Ahmed. What would you recommend if I want to use Cypress to do accessibility testing?
Right. So for accessibility, there is Cypress X plugin, AXE, like like a battle X. So there is a very popular X library, and Cypress X just wraps around it and injects it into the browser. So you can, for example, visit the page and say like site.x, and then it will check all accessibility metrics, right? Like text, area attributes, layouts, right? Meta, keywords. Or you can just say, for example, check maybe just visual accessibility, like the contrast, okay, of your text and your background. So Cypress X is the plugin to go.
Amazing. Prasad acknowledges with a thank you note on this chat section. He's been one of the active members asking quite a few questions. So he's a very happy man today. There's a question from Nikhil, I think probably a very common question, and it's all about log files. So I don't know if you heard about listeners in Selenium. So he's asking something relating to that, generating log files and appending and all that.
So that would be, it depends, right? So what do you want to log? Because, so imagine Cypress has a long test, right? Lots of commands, site visit, site get, site click, site type, right? If you talk about those commands and their arguments, right? There is my Cypress file log plugin that just dumps the whole JSON with arguments. There is also Cypress terminal reporter that logs everything very, very nicely in your terminal, so you can kind of see which things finished and which ones not. By default, because Cypress is a complete testing solution, when you use Cypress, right out of the box, if it fails, it takes a screenshot so you can see the left side, right, with last commands. Also, Cypress by default takes a video of the whole run, so you can actually see the whole browser and how it behaves. So that kind of not completely eliminates, but kind of makes the logging less important. But you still sometimes want to log big objects and like results of network, right, return. So for that, I believe Cypress terminal reporter. I forgot the name, right? But you can probably find it right. So basically, where you can say, you can create it and it will dump each command and its argument right into the terminal right away. So not JSON, but you can see everything reflected in the terminal. And if you have big objects that you get, for example, by spying on network, you could just dump it and you will see it in your terminal. And then if something goes wrong, you're like, oh, wow, I have wrong number of items in the API response. Okay, I should look into that.
Thank you. Next question is from an anonymous attendee. The question just says when Safari. So I assume the question is all about when does Cypress will support Safari?
Well, first of all, Safari support was released a couple versions back. So what happened was Safari is really hard to control from outside, right? So Playwright team at Microsoft, they took Safari, they took WebKit, which is an open source browser, the basis of Safari. They took it, they forked it, and they added Chrome Debugger Protocol support. And that's how Playwright can control Safari. It's a WebKit that they can control. And then Cypress team just took the same browser and just controls it exactly the same way by sending Chrome Debugger Protocol commands. So Cypress does support WebKit. Is it that different from testing in Chrome or Firefox? Not really,
Yeah.
I would say. This browser is all the same now, so it's.
Cool. I think we're slightly overshoot on the original plan, but let's take a last question, which sort of an outro to your talk, Gleb. The question is, how would you go about creating your own Cypress plugin if none of the existing ones meet your needs? So I think you'll be the better man to answer that, isn't it?
The previous version of this presentation from 2 years ago actually kind of went through a step-by-step where I showed how I would write a plugin for getting an input element by the label, right? Because it's a separate element. So you find the label, then you find for attribute, and then you find the input. So to save time, I had to cut it out. But I have blog posts about it, right? So go to cypress.tip/search and search for like Cypress plugin or publishing Cypress plugin on NPM. I have, I think, 2 blog posts because it's like first part and then how to publish it on NPM. So those blog posts kind of show how to do it. But in reality, it's just NPM module, right? So you publish it just like any NPM JavaScript.
Cool. I think I've just asked my colleagues at LambdaTest to post the live tweet thread and a LinkedIn post because we are doing a live thread on both Twitter as well as on LinkedIn comments. So Gleb, post this session, you could send the links to me and we could update the thread so that everyone can look at it.
Yeah, I'm sorry because what happened, if I go to the chat, I think I can send it to you, Manoj.
Sure. No worries. We can do it. Yeah. Oh, there you go. And thank you, Sparsh, for putting together the link for the presentation that Gleb was presenting today. So with that, I think it's almost 3 minutes over the time, and still there's quite a few questions. So if you still, we can send them over to Dr. Gleb a little later, and we will happy to post that as a mini FAQs for Cypress plugins on the blog. I think we can put it that as a blog in a different times. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And Gleb, for the record, I'm sure you would love. We had people from India, US, France, Portugal, Seattle, Germany, Pakistan, Argentina, Bosnia and Herzegovina, a lot of these countries. So I'm sure a big thank you to all these folks who joined us from different parts of the world. And thank you. And I'll see you in the next version of Voice of Community.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care, everyone.
And do register for TestMu Conf 2023 if you have not known about it. I'll post the link on the chat channel quickly, and you can go ahead and register for yourself. It's a completely community conference that we as a team put together from LambdaTest, and would love to see you all there. With that, thank you. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.